The following is an OHEI podcast production. This episode may contain coarse language and content sensitive to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome to our Downtown Eastside Talks. I first want to acknowledge that this show takes place on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I also want to make another acknowledgement that we're having a show called Our Downtown Eastside Talks without members of the Downtown Eastside. This has been a conscious decision for the safety and respect of those who live outside and in our SROs. It's simply too dangerous to have them on, and we're not willing to do that for content. We have JESS LAR-SON here from Politics with Jess. How did you get started in this journey of Politico?
Oh, it's a very long and convoluted story.
Tell me.
And for me, I actually always go back to my maternal grandmother. My baba was a lifelong CUPE member and a political organizer out in Ontario. She was the first one to unionize social workers under Big Brothers. And she, I have this newspaper article of her advocating for the end of sterilization of women on welfare in Toronto. So I kind of just come from this heavy organizer background. My mom was also, quite political. She always took me to vote. She was much more about educating us about our options and just impressing upon us the importance and the privilege of voting. So I kind of, put those two things together and have been an activist pretty much my whole life. I attended my first protest when I was 8 years old. And it just kind of, grew from there. Once I found myself in university, I was really involved in environmental causes and feminism and, got involved with a few groups on campus, including the student newspaper and the publishing society. Ended up as president of my student union and the vice president external and the women's representative. And after university, I found myself working for a few different members of the Legislative Assembly, including Ginny Sims and Surrey Panorama. I worked for Judy Darcy in New Westminster. I've worked for Raj Chauhan, who's the Speaker of the House then and now. And I also worked on several federal NDP campaigns, including Jagmeet Singh's by-election in 2019. And then I managed both of Breen Willette's NDP campaigns in 2019 and in 2021. After all that, though, I really found that a lot of those political systems are not very accessible and not often very inclusive, and that a lot of people, even who claim to have really progressive values, don't always follow through on those values, especially behind closed doors.
Right.
So I, during COVID, a lot of people, my boss was retiring. I had the opportunity to step away from that work. So I started my own copywriting business. I'm the inclusive copywriter. That's what I do for my day job. But obviously, I still really care about political topics and especially about nonpartisan political education, which is what I do now at at Politics with Jess. So,
Yeah,
shortest version.
That's the shortest. That you've done a lot. That's quite something. What was it like working with Jagmeet?
Jagmeet, honestly, is a really personable and lovely guy to work for. My experience working with him, I have nothing but good things to say. But, especially now and then, I did have some criticisms of more the internal structure of the NDP and kind of how only a few people kind of hold power at the top, and they're not always that open to dissent or suggestions. And that's been really visible at the federal and at the provincial level when you look at conventions and how a lot of them have lost members in recent years because they've kind of ostracized their base. And I would look specifically at people who care about the environment or people with disabilities. So while I still, have good things to say about a lot of the people I worked with kind of as people, I just didn't feel like I could continue to work under the NDP umbrella.
Right.
And I just like being a bit more of a free agent and not having to toe a party line.
So are you nonpartisan now?
Yeah,
or
100%.
Wow, really?
Yeah. I mean, I still have, the way that I'll vote. And again, I think for me, because I know so much about the behind the scenes, I kind of know who the good ones are.
Right.
But I definitely do remain a nonpartisan presence, especially on social media, because I do now do work. I recently did work with Elections BC during the provincial election, and I also will be a recruitment supervisor starting today, basically for Elections Canada.
Congratulations. Yeah, new job.
Yeah, so just a reminder for anyone, if you're interested in working for the federal election, it's a great time to apply now. It was my experience. Yeah, get on it. It was my experience during the provincial that a lot of people applied really late, like really close to election day. But, we have to train people, obviously. So get your applications in now. Just go to elections.ca/jobs and check the eligibility and come work for us.
Wow,
Yeah.
cool. And so what will you be doing for elections?
So
For Elections BC.
Yeah. So for the Elections Canada this time.
Canada, rather.
Yeah, for the federal election. The recruitment supervisor and like the recruiters oversee the hiring of all of the poll workers. So, when you go in to vote, like the people that are working in the voting location,
Yeah.
I hire all of them. So for this, like for the provincial, in one riding, you can hire about 200 to 300 people, sometimes more if it's a really large area. And that includes workers for the advanced voting locations as well as for election day. And then you also have people who do like the counting, and there are also people who work in the office to administer voting. So it's quite a lot of people that need to be hired. And that's why personally I was hoping that Mark Carney was going to go for the later date of May 5th, but it was announced today they went for April 28th. And I do understand an argument for getting it done quicker, but that does
he's
mean
just put a lot of work
yes,
in your
I have
lap.
to work a little bit faster to hire all those people.
I kind of love that, like, the Prime Minister is giving you, like extra work. I'm really happy for you. That's an incredible opportunity.
Yeah. Well, and it's great because, a big mandate for hiring is to do like inclusive and diverse hiring. And of course, that's something I'm passionate about. So I'm happy that I can, do my role for democracy and help run like safe and accessible elections for everyone.
Yeah. And so you started politics with JESS. Why? What was the impetus for that?
I just have a lot to say. I'm sure you'll discover I'm a bit of a talker. I'm kind of that person. I love to go out for a beer meeting where we end up banging on tables and shouting about politics. And I've definitely done that with lots of people. But you can't, drink beer every day with everyone in the world. So
debatable,
right?
Debatable.
So instead, I decided that because I had my business, and that's where I can make an income. I can focus on writing, which is really more what I do professionally. But I wanted to be able to help with voter outreach. Before I got involved in real politics, when I was at the student union, because you're technically representing every student, you're also supposed to maintain a nonpartisan persona. So at that time, we did a lot of nonpartisan voter outreach, more like get out the vote stuff. So we would like register students to vote. I volunteered for a few different nonpartisan organizations that call people just to tell them to vote, not necessarily to tell them who to vote for. So I kind of already done some of that nonpartisan work previously. And it is something that I kind of felt when I was working in government. And like, obviously, when you're working for political parties doing campaigns, if you're chatting with people from other parties, you're still encouraging them to vote. Like most of us are still out there being like, just go vote. Like, we want you to vote for us, but ideally you just go and vote.
Just please vote.
Just vote, please. Especially during something like a by-election or a municipal election, voter turnout can be really low.
Yeah.
So
I've
seen that
different.
kind of from every angle, and I wanted to be able to do my part without kind of having a boss or belonging to a political party. Because, I know there's lots of nonprofits out there doing great work, but I've also kind of dealt with, let's say the messy parts of nonprofits as well.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to be able to do it like from my own angle and from an educational standpoint, where I still get to kind of slip in some of my values here and there.
Right. Now, why in relation to, say, the Downtown Eastside is it important to vote?
So one thing when I was managing campaigns that we wanted to do more was voter outreach to marginalized communities. But the problem is that political parties, and I would argue the government, don't prioritize that. And so, it puts the onus on the individuals or smaller grassroots organizations to help inform voters who might not be able to easily access information. And I feel like that really is relevant to the people in the Downtown East Side. They're not a priority, right? Yeah. They're not being treated like a priority. People aren't making an effort to do that kind of outreach in these communities a lot of the time. And so any work that we can do to help increase voter awareness, increase the access to voting, and sharing information that if you're homeless, you can vote. If you're from any kind of marginalized community, you can vote, you should vote. And, I think a lot of people don't know how easy it is to go vote. It takes very little identification. Oftentimes there are mobile voting sites like at hospitals or care homes or SROs. Like they do some of that. Yeah. But it's not enough.
No, it's not enough. What do you think, what initiatives could be taken to, because like, for example, the ID is the biggest thing that people like, because some people don't have a piece of mail or anything like that. What could our government do to lower that barrier?
Well, sometimes I think about how for most people, they only really pay attention to the election once it's been called. And even more so once we get really close to the voting day. But Elections Canada, for example, the government of Canada, like the Liberal Party, all the other parties have been aware that an election is coming, right? For months.
Yeah.
And personally, it's those in-between times between elections where more could be done. I mean, I feel like this is also a bigger systemic issue where if we just, took care of homeless people and helped them find homes and support.
If there was no homelessness,
if we did all the other stuff we should be doing, that's another piece of it. But that aside, just kind of for the sake of this question, I feel like that, almost what we would call stakeholder outreach needs to happen in between elections where there's a connection to the community and, advocates within the community that we can, organize with to help people get that information and get out to the polls, right?
Well, so you've been talking to some of the candidates right now, and I'm sure you know about the ones that you haven't quite talked to. Yeah. If you're trying to vote for the Downtown East Side, who are some of the candidates that you would recommend?
So I don't like to give blanket endorsements, but I kind of will help people get pointed in the right direction because frankly, I'll say from the nonpartisan perspective, some people will see different candidates as the right solution for what's happening in the Downtown East Side. But I would say that I would look to the left. If you're, really passionate about supporting the Downtown East Side, thinking about issues like housing and affordability and accessibility, and the folks who kind of land on the left or towards the left, I would definitely look at Sean Orr's campaign with COPE. He's, a popular option. His office is right here. He lives here. He's been, in this community, around this community for decades, as far as I know. And he also ran in the last municipal election for the Socialists. So that kind of tells you a little bit about his values.
Yeah, Socialist is about as far left as you get. Yeah.
And I think it's great that he's, joined with COPE to help kind of grow that base. And from what I can see, they're running a really great campaign there. They're doing a lot of outreach. They're in the community. They've attended debates and things like that.
Yeah, it's been impressive. They're doing something every day.
Yeah, and I think that's how it should be, right? I mean, so the other options kind of along that vein, one city, is technically a break off from COPE. Even if you just look up COPE's Wikipedia, you can read the history of how those parties used to all be one.
I knew this. I knew the Socialist and Cope used to be
One
one.
City
but
is
One
also
City, oh,
like an
I'm sure I've been
offshoot.
told that. But,
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's interesting for me because people I used to work with in the NDP work in both of those parties,
Right.
municipally. So I would still like take a look at like the One City campaign Lucy Maloney's running. And of course, that's where Christine Boyle was from One City, and she's now gone to become an MLA. So that's
Right.
part of the reason why we're
We're
having a
having the
by-election, right?
by-election,
So,
yeah.
I mean, arguably, if people liked Christine and liked One City, they're likely to potentially vote for Lucy and the One City team again. But if you're kind of like wanting to go a little bit more to the socialist end, then yeah, there's the Cope option. Some people would characterize the Vancouver Greens and Annette Riley's campaign on the left. I always kind of look at the Greens as sort of on the left, but there's a reason that the Greens and Cope and One City are all separate. So there are things that make them different.
Yeah.
They
They are very friendly with each other,
yes,
though.
definitely.
So that's like they have some differences, but
It's kind of like a Venn diagram.
Yeah.
Right? Like a lot of those parties kind of like share a lot of the same values. And one of the interesting things that I've seen is that when I've been talking to the other candidates, like I did talk to both of the ABC candidates. I haven't put their interviews out yet. And I spoke with a couple independent candidates, and pretty much all of them mentioned housing. So, that's kind of what I was saying, is that depending on your own political background, you're going to see like those candidates in a different light, and they are all talking about housing. They are all talking about the Downtown Eastside, but that's why I would encourage people to look deeper into their platforms to see whose values align best with your own.
right. So when we're talking about going to vote right now, we keep saying like this is so important. We really need to fight ABC, blah blah, not blah blah blah, but
Yada, yada, yada.
et cetera, yada yada. Could you explain to me? I've not wanted to be like discouraging to people, but it almost doesn't make a difference getting two people in because there's still a majority. Could you speak to that?
That is a great question. It is a very similar question to what I have asked actually Sean. So if you want to hear Sean's answer to that question, you can just go to my page at Politics.
Hey, no advertising on the
But I actually did ask another independent candidate the same kind of question. Like, I basically asked them, what would you say to people who are concerned that a sole candidate or just one or two candidates can't make a difference? And, I actually do kind of agree with what Sean said, where, you look at Jean Swanson, right? Like historically on city council, Jean was the only Cope candidate who's kind of, there to hold the other parties to account, right? And, I think Sean also said to like keep them honest. And, when we look at, the provincial and the federal systems where we have like the opposition parties, and you look at things like how Jagmeet has like pushed the Liberals to do things like dental care and like focus more on healthcare, there's always an opportunity for people in opposition to push the envelope a little bit, and also to create, a sense of accountability because they're in those rooms. It's kind of that question of, just because we don't agree with the majority of people making a decision, would we rather a room where they're the only ones in the room, or where there's, people to watch what's happening, people to report on what's happening, people to contest what's happening? It is, to me, really important. It's the same reason why it's also important for us to have, free media and different people kind of keeping an eye on what's going on. So I think it's partly as watchers, but also partly as individuals who can press those issues and push back and be a voice for people who are maybe not being considered by the group that's in charge.
Yeah, absolutely. I've also heard that there is, I won't say who, but that there is a possibility that they could sway some of the ABC people just by humanity or common sense. Do you think that that's a possibility?
To me, like that's less of kind of a like philosophical feelsy question and more of a logistical campaign question. When I was asked about how ABC did so well during the municipal election, from a campaign like organizer and manager perspective, my response was that they had a really good ground game. They have really good outreach. And, even in talking to their candidates, and I did press them a little bit on like the issue of them not being at debates and things like that. And they're basically saying that they're doing outreach to like smaller groups,
Right.
And like what we would call like stakeholder groups in like organizing language. So I don't think that you can ever just rely on people's feelings when it comes to marketing, which is really when it comes down to it, what politics is it's marketing. Like your political campaign is a marketing campaign, which
I haven't heard
sucks.
of it that way. Yeah.
Well, Obama's campaign won marketing awards.
That was marketing. Yeah.
Right. Like even like you think
those
of slogans.
posters were so like,
yeah. And like in my day job, I'm a copywriter. So that's like my whole thing is I talk a lot about like branding and target audiences. And I know all of that because I did campaign work and sales and some other stuff. But you have to reach people in order to persuade them. And if you don't have a good like marketing strategy for your campaign, even if you do have a great emotional argument to win people over, how are you going to convince them? And there's also, some studies that have been done, and I'm not always great with numbers, so I'm not going to quote the numbers, but essentially people have to see things multiple times in order to be convinced. Like that's why when we see ads, those ads are playing on repeat. Because I think it is something like 7 or 11 times. I always get the two mixed up. But if you see something like 7 times, you're so much more likely to take action, right? So yes, you can persuade people with an emotional or a moral argument, but you can only do that if you reach enough people, right? And also if you reach your target audience, and if your messaging is not inclusive and accessible to that target audience, it makes it all the more difficult.
So what are the chances of, and what would be the end result if ABC did get those 2 seats?
That's an interesting way to look at it, because I don't think anyone has asked me that before. Like, what if ABC just, wins everything? Personally, I think there is a chance that could happen because there's only 2 seats, right? And if they really mobilize their base, who really showed up for them, obviously, in the municipal election, I think it's really a question of how many people are thrilled with what Mayor Ken Sim and ABC are doing currently, and how many people are maybe pissed off enough, right? So it's really about that whole idea of like mobilizing not just your base, but to grow that base, to get people out to the polls. And it's possible, but I also think with what I'm seeing from the other candidates, they're definitely putting up a fight, right? And I think again, like we're replacing a very popular, well-known, well-liked one city councillor, like who's now an MLA, but I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the kind of progressives do band behind 1 or 2 of these more left-leaning candidates. And if that's the case, like that's something else, we could talk about later, the whole division of the left. But if they do band together enough, then there is a possibility that one of those more progressive candidates takes 1 or both of the seats, right? So I always kind of say, like, it's too soon to tell. But I think the situation in this by-election more so is that voter turnout can be so low during a by-election. Like one of the candidates was mentioning earlier today that the last by-election had only 11% voter turnout, and municipal elections can be like around 20, I think 20 or 30. Yeah. So it can be really low. So like every vote counts, right? Like a couple hundred votes or even like a couple dozen votes could decide this election for a
by-election turnout is so low. But like when Ken Sim got in as mayor, the numbers were really different. Like from him, it was like 86,000 or something people that voted for him, and then like the next people down, it was significantly less. So it's a little scary.
And the argument for that one though, like especially during the municipal election, there were so many candidates. Right?
Yeah.
Like there was over 100 candidates. I couldn't interview them all. It was hard, right?
Yeah,
I feel for you.
Yeah.
But at least in this by-election, like there are a handful of independent candidates, but historically they don't always perform very well when it comes to actually getting the vote out.
Yeah.
And again, to me, that's a logistical issue. It's a financing issue.
Yeah.
Especially when you're maybe working another job or maybe you're retired or whatever the situation is. If you don't have kind of the campaign machine that COPE or One City or ABC has, you're really going to struggle to do the same level of voter outreach that those more established campaigns can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, maybe this is a tall ask, but what would you say that politicians have been getting wrong in the Downtown Eastside for the last couple of
How long do you have?
years? We still have plenty of time. This could be it.
So, I mean, kind of like taking a step back from that question, like what have they been doing wrong? I think, stigma and a lack of understanding is certainly part of the problem. There's an argument to be made that a lot of politicians kind of walk into politics with good intentions. And then it kind of, can break off into so many different ways where there's the people with good intentions who immediately lose those good intentions. There's the people with good intentions who just have like no clue how to actually fix it. And then there's also, something I'd say like is a problem, not just municipally, but kind of the lower level you go in politics. A lot of the time when people get elected, especially someone who's not experienced, which frankly, Ken Sim had no experience in politics.
Yeah,
so that is
he
something.
Was in bagels before
exactly. People get in and they want to reinvent the wheel, right? They're like, we'll do another study. And this happens on the provincial and the federal level, I would say as well. They're like, we're going to do another this, another that. We're going to like even provincially when we did the temporary housing, that has not really taken off. It has not really solved any of the problems. And you kind of notice they don't really talk about the modular housing a whole lot these days.
So they approved it, but
well, so you know how we had like modular housing kind of pop up when the BCNDP was first elected?
The modular, not the like tiny homes.
No, not the tiny homes.
Okay.
Like more like it's semi-permanent housing.
Right.
Right. A lot of those kind of popped up, but like that stopped happening. So I think there's also that thing of they talk a big game, they want to fix it, they get in, they kind of throw some money at it, they do something, but when it doesn't really work or doesn't work the way they wanted it to, they just kind of throw their hands up and say, well, look what we did, right? Like they still want to be applauded for those kind of half-assed efforts, which I don't believe in, kind of applauding people for doing the bare minimum. That's just my hot take. But I think, there's so many kind of like logistical issues, like philosophical issues about how to solve, which we call the problem. But I also think that is the problem, is that these are individuals, like they're real humans who are struggling, and we look at it like the same way that we do, issues that don't have that level of humanity in them. That's kind of the way that I look at it. Like people start looking at it as numbers and finances. And, I am also a little bit of a bleeding heart. Like I just really care about people. And I think a lot of people who get into politics kind of lose that ability to see people as
so
people.
Odd, because like politics, like that actually like it means for the people.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I think, again, it's that whole idea of people get into it with good intentions, but you start kind of justifying things where you're like, well, we can't help everybody. Or, I've heard a lot of people give the like, well, if they don't want the help that's available to them, like I've heard that one a million times. And what people don't understand is like on an individual level, the cases are more complicated than that, right?
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who do want like help or support or assistance. And it's not just about like a blanket solution. Like, I don't know that I can necessarily get into the specifics of how to fix it. But I think like the way that politicians are getting it wrong is that they're not like really understanding what the issues are. And, something that I saw when I was working in the provincial government is I met a couple different MLAs, for example, who did like, it's like a homelessness challenge, which I can't even begin to tell you how like
What?
cringy and horrible that
I'm like
is
afraid
to
to
me.
hear what this is.
So I don't need to tell you if you don't want to know.
No, please. It's okay.
But basically they like lived in their cars for like a weekend or a week or something like that, and they're like, oh yeah, I finally started to understand what it's like. And I'm like, you have a home, like you have a home to go to, you have a support system, you have a family, like you don't understand. Or when the union leaders do this too, they do like a welfare challenge where it's just so gross to me, right? So for a month they'll live off of the groceries that you can afford if you're on welfare.
And then they go, wow, this is really hard. Like,
yeah, but then they don't do anything about it, right? And that's kind of the kind of thing I feel like there's a lot of performative actions in government and that we see from politicians. And like, I think that's because a lot of people in politics come from such a place of privilege that they really like have never lived in poverty. Like they've never been hungry. They've never experienced homelessness or addiction or like mental health issues where they couldn't just get support. Right?
Yeah.
And that to me is why representation is important in politics, and to have people who have lived experience be involved in those decisions. And I have seen like some programs where there's like an attempt to do that, but it's in a very tokenizing way. Like I remember going to some meetings with the city of New Westminster where they had people with lived experience with addictions. And New Westminster is an interesting example where it's a very progressive place. There's a lot of connection to the addictions community there. But again, like it's one token person. It's not like they're running the show. It's not like they're given like proper resources and support to actually enact any programs. It's more of a like, so the politicians can pat themselves on the back and say, we talked to a homeless, and it's just not enough.
It absolutely isn't. Jess, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for your expert opinion.
Always happy to talk, and to talk, I think, in a way, hopefully, that lets people realize that politics can be accessible and that it is valuable to form your own opinions on these issues.
Beautiful. Thanks for joining us on our Downtown Eastside Talks.